My friends, welcome to the headquarters. As you've probably heard by now, the head of the Wagner Pmc, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is dead. On the 23rd of August, his business jet crashed north of Moscow with 10 people aboard, among which the founder of the Wagner Pmc, Dmitry Utkin, call sign Wagner. And the next day, on August 24th, Russian media reported that Prigozhin's body was identified by one of the commanders of the Wagner Pmc at the morgue. Prigozhin was identified by the fact that part of his finger was missing. Utkin was identified by his height and with his many Nordic-themed tattoos. So yeah, the musician hung his coat.
Повесил свой сюртук на спинку стула музыкант.
In some sort of irony of life, Prigozhin did not die on the front line. Despite risking his life visiting the troops, countless PR stunts and lots of trolling of the Ukrainian army. Nope, he had to die in a plane crash. This is how we could summarize Prigozhin's campaign in Ukraine.
Are you not entertained?
And trolling he did all his life. In February 2021, the FBI offered a $250,000 reward for information on Prigozhin's whereabouts. So Prigozhin got in touch with the FBI, sent them his home address, and demanded the payment of the $250,000 reward. Sources claim he did not receive the money. You see, Wagner was described as a two-headed eagle. The entire military part of the organization was supervised by Utkin, and the entire political aspect by Prigozhin. Now, the question that you all might be asking, what will happen of the Wagner Pmc now? Wagnerian commanders most likely already selected one of theirs to replace Prigozhin as head of the Wagner Pmc. And because of that, it also seems unlikely that the PMC will be dissolved. Well, first of all, there were countless of articles released in the Western media, all with more or less the same headlines. This is Putin's revenge, and he's the one behind the plane crash.
What if we blame this on someone who's out of control?
It's hard to say if Putin was directly involved in the plane crash, but it's almost certain the Russian state was in one way or another behind this. Let's be honest, that would be a clear signal for all future Wagner commanders and other generals of the Russian army to what would happen if they dare challenge authority. Meanwhile, on the 25th of August, there were rumors that Wagner's cemetery was getting demolished. To be honest, the war in Ukraine is slowly reaching the same level of political intrigue as in Game of Thrones. Let's be honest, who didn't think at one point that this plane crash was part of some sort of maskirovka, that it was staged? And just a couple weeks ago, Prigozhin said it himself, that the PMC would go back into business this August. We could have had a plane crash as diversion, and like in some Wagner Brothers movie, they just reappear. And then, all of a sudden, from the bases in Belarus, we have thousands of Wagnerians storming Kyiv. But then we waited some more, and nothing happened. Let's be honest, the latest images show that Prigozhin will be missed in Russia. He was one of a kind. This colorful character definitely brought some juicy headlines for the media as well as for commentators. A crying old babushka told some journalists, Prigozhin was killed, like Nemtsov. Only Nemtsov was not as sympathetic to me as Prigozhin. This man was with the people, unlike him. All over the country, spontaneous little memorials popped up, honoring both Prigozhin and Utkin. That was the view of the Wagner Center in St. Petersburg. Prigozhin will be missed, especially by all the men that fought under the Wagnerian banner. Here's a touching scene from a Wagner veteran in Novosibirsk. And in this video, another Wagnerian soldier paying tribute on a beach near Sebastopol. People brought flowers, candles, and many symbols related to the Wagner Pmc, like violins and the infamous sledgehammer. In this one, you can see what the people of Belgorod set up. The people from Moscow, soldiers of the Wagner Pmc visited a spontaneous memorial near the Rostov circus. the same location where the Red Z tank was positioned during the mutiny. The reason behind all this is simple. The people of Russia, despite their support for the president, know very well who achieved the military victory at Bakhmut. So how come Prigozhin's story had to come to such an abrupt end in friendly territory? First of all, Prigozhin is not a military man. He's a businessman in the food industry. And long story short, we can suppose that he was entrusted with the command of the Wagner Pmc due to his close relationship with Putin. For years, there were rumors that Prigozhin was the public figure of the Wagner Pmc. But it's only at the start of the Russo-Ukrainian war that we got confirmation when Prigozhin appeared in army fatigues at the front as part of the Wagner Pmc. At the time, he was nicknamed the Flying Dutchman because he came and went and stayed very low-key, just like he did for all the years before that. The first frictions between Prigozhin and the Ministry of Defense seem to have appeared in January 2023. His food catering company amassed 560 lawsuits in 2022 by Russia's defense ministry for allegedly supplying the Russian army with poor quality, rotten and infected food. Was it real or just a setup? It's really when he started recruiting prison inmates for the Wagner Pmc for the upcoming Battle of Bakhmut that he rose to such prominence in the infospace. Prigozhin's diversion maneuver in Bakhmut and the recruitment of inmates worked too well. All of a sudden, the Wagner Pmc grew from 8,000 men to 50,000 men. It was an army within an army. And this is when the Ministry of Defense started to put the brakes on his project. On February 21st, 2023, he had already started complaining about the Ministry of Defense.
Начальник генерального штаба и министр обороны раздают направо и налево команды, в которых говорится о том, чтобы ЧВК «Вагнер» не только боеприпасов не давать, а в том числе не помогать авиатранспортом.
And a lot of his attacks and PR stunts were aimed directly at Shoigu, the Minister of Defense. Despite all the problems it encountered, the Wagner Pmc was victorious in Bakhmut. Both the Ministry of Defense and Vladimir Putin congratulated Wagner assault detachments on the completion of the operation in Bakhmut. However, despite the praise they got from the government, we could feel that the Wagnerians fell out of favor, as shortly after, all Wagnerians were asked to sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense, especially with the looming Ukrainian counteroffensive. And things took a dramatic turn with the subsequent mutiny when they captured the headquarters of the Southern Military District in Rostov, and when they drove 700 kilometers to the outskirts of Moscow. And like that, Prigozhin called off the mutiny and all the Wagnerians went back to base. What was not revealed immediately is that Prigozhin did end up meeting with Putin on June 29th. A 3-hour discussion with all of Wagner's commanders, essentially after which it was agreed that Wagnerians could relocate to Belarus. Then things seemed to have settled down, that a compromise was reached, and that they lived happily forever after. From Belarus, videos then emerged of Prigozhin and Utkin claiming Wagner would start a new adventure in Africa, which made sense after the coup in Niger and the tensions in Mali and Burkina Faso. And what's super strange is that on the 22nd of August, so one day before the plane crash, Prigozhin released the following video from what seems to be Africa.
Работаем. Температура плюс 50. Все как мы любим. ЧВК «Вагнер» проводит РПД. Делает Россию еще более великой на всех континентах. А Африку еще более свободной.
However, at the same time, we can't ignore the toll that all the latest events took on him. He was once this 007 type of character, and now he seems very tired and stranded in some remote field camp. On Wednesday, the 23rd of August, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was reported that the Legacy 600 business jet belonging to Yevgeny Prigozhin's company had crashed. Here are the images that some local residents recorded right after the jet crashed, near the village of Kuzhenkino, in the Tver region north of Moscow. This is when the internet went wild with speculation, with the first reports of Prigozhin's death, because he was in the list of passengers of that exact plane. Rumors even claimed the aircraft was shot down by Russian air defense. And at the time, it would have been a possible payback for Wagnerian columns destroying multiple Russian aircraft during their march on Moscow. I mean, that would have been a clear symbol, but also way too obvious. Even Zelensky quickly made an announcement saying Ukraine wasn't responsible for the plane crash. Too bad. Ukrainian air defense would have really enjoyed the bragging rights of shooting down multiple Prigozhins. Meanwhile, others believed that Uncle Prigozhin was still alive. And once again, that this was all part of some cunning maskerovka. That's because his second Legacy 600 business jet, which also belonged to Prigozhin, was said to have safely landed in St. Petersburg shortly after. The claims were that in recent weeks, for the purpose of secrecy, Yevgeny Prigozhin was registered on one plane and that at the last moment he would have boarded another. The theory of him being alive was not completely crazy. Prigozhin had already been declared dead on October 13th, 2019, when his plane crashed in the Congo. During that time, Prigozhin was buried in social media. Some even prepared funerals. But 3 days later, he told reporters that he was safe in the bathhouse. But then this theory collapsed when it was revealed that the second plane did not actually belong to Prigozhin, and that it was now flying towards Azerbaijan. Eventually, the results of the autopsy came out, and the bodies were finally identified. Prigozhin and Utkin were indeed inside that plane that had crashed. A total of 10 people on board, with 4 other passengers and a 3-people crew. But what's crazy is that according to Wargonzo, Prigozhin himself often shuffled the passengers list and changed aircraft at the last moment. But apparently that day he decided not to. During these confusing times, a lot of fakes were spread on social media. Like this one, where fake Wagnerians, most likely a Ukrainian psyop, pushed the story of another mutiny. Or how the 20 guys of the Russian Legion tried to convince Wagner to fight the Russian government with them. Wagnerians are very nationalistic, they just don't want to fight under the command of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Eventually, we also got more news regarding what happened during the crash. The business jet is said to have been almost intact when it hit the ground. When the main part of the aircraft crashed into a forest clearing, the wing and the landing gear were found 3 kilometers southeast from the crash site. Had it been a missile strike from air defense, the aircraft would have exploded mid-air. And the fact that the aircraft fell in 2 pieces also cancels any theories regarding an accident. One of the most likely scenarios is an explosive device planted in the landing gear compartment. When it exploded, the aircraft's wing was torn off, which then hit the stabilizer. Because of this, the business jet eventually went into a tailspin, and within less than 30 seconds, it crashed. There was also information about who could have planted the explosive. Allegedly, the suspect is Prigozhin's personal pilot and travel logistician, someone named Artem Stepanov. He was among the only ones that had access to the plane before takeoff, after which he quickly left for Kamchatka, from where he went off radar. Now, law enforcement is actively looking for Stepanov, but many believe he already left the country. To be honest, we don't even know if he's still alive. Dead men tell no tales.
I want to express sincere condolences to the families of all those who died. It is always a tragedy. Indeed, if they were there, and according to the initial information, Wagner company employees were on board. I want to note that those people made a significant contribution to our common cause of we remember this, we know this, and we will not forget this.
The moment Putin released this video, it was clear to me that Prigozhin was dead. Putin would look really silly if Prigozhin suddenly reappeared. Also notice the fact that this public statement was released really fast, which could point that the script of this public statement was written beforehand. Is it crazy to think that the FSB was somewhat involved in this? Now check out what Putin said in an interview from 2018.
Вы умеете прощать?
Да. Но не все.
А что невозможно простить?
Предательство.
Prigozhin was not anyone to Putin. It was someone that had known Putin for a long time, and Putin trusted him. I'm just brainstorming right now. But it's clear that Shoigu did not like Prigozhin, and vice versa. We can think that Shoigu wanted to get rid of Prigozhin a long time ago, but perhaps Putin was the one holding him off. After all, they were friends. Shoigu probably warned Putin multiple times that Prigozhin is a dangerous man with lots of ambition and that he wants to become president of Russia, or at least as someone that is uncontrollable and that will push the interest of the Wagner Corps or his own to the detriment of the entire Russian armed forces. And that Wagner mutiny was like a splash of frozen water in Putin's face. And this is when he realized that Shoigu was perhaps right all along. Let me know in the comment section what you think. In the end, to what extent this plane crash was organized is hard to say. What I find strange is that General Sergei Surovikin was relieved of the post of Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force on August 18th, allegedly for a certain role he played during Wagner's mutiny. And 5 days later, there's a plane crash. We could speculate that perhaps he held off airstrikes on the Wagner columns marching towards Moscow, or perhaps in reality it has nothing to do with the mutiny. Before we cover what will happen to the Wagner Pmc, let's talk about the second victim of this plane crash, the famous yet very mysterious Dmitry Utkin, the original Wagner and founder of the Wagner Pmc. I mean, let's be honest, with lightning bolt tattoos and the call sign Wagner, we can already have an idea of his political leanings. And all the pictures we have of him are either him being very serious or angry. So here's a very rare picture of Dmitry Utkin that I'm showing you where we actually see him smiling when he was young. Here's another picture of him as commander of the reconnaissance group of the 876th Separate Company of the GRU Special Forces, somewhere in North Ossetia in the late 1990s. He rose through the ranks quickly, and around the year 2001-2002, he got promoted to battalion commander of the 700 separate detachments of the GRU. Apparently, almost all of the awards of that specific detachment were won under his command. He had a very aggressive approach. One day, as part of a recon mission, they got shelled by the enemy. He then gave the order, forward, and then rushed towards the enemy. His way of leading was that forward was always the best option. And from what I could gather, the Wagnerians really loved him. One of them said the following on Telegram. When the company was much smaller, but nevertheless already numbered more than 2,000 fighters, call sign Wagner, or as he is called, the 9th, could quietly approach the circle of fighters discussing something and silently stood with them, waiting for the end of a story, after which you could talk with him or just sit down for a cup of coffee. He knew almost everyone by then, if not by name, by call sign. They all said that Utkin had a special intuition regarding warfare. He instinctively knew when it was necessary to pull back troops or when he could carry on the assault. Honestly, what could be said of Utkin could be said of most of Wagner's detachment commanders. So, what now? So yeah, what will happen to the Wagner Pmc, which reportedly still has 20,000 men at arms in its ranks? First of all, regarding this video I showed you earlier, when some people claim that the cemetery was getting demolished, it's actually to make space for the traditional Wagnerian marble pyramids that will replace the wooden crosses. You have to look at Wagner like a wolf pack, and they see the regular Russian army like domesticated dogs. That's why they don't want to be transferred under the command of the Ministry of Defense, because they will then lose their wolf nature. So right after the plane crash, there were reports that the Council of Commanders of the Pmc Wagner assembled to discuss the next steps. As a military organization, I highly doubt that they had not prepared something for this scenario. Any commanding officer always has a number 2 to take over the unit. Now the golden question is, who will take over command? It could be an outsider, someone trustworthy and close to Putin, like Prigozhin himself. At the same time, because of their high cohesion, I hardly see Wagnerians accepting an outsider as leader. It will most likely be someone from their own ranks. Alexander Mikhailov was interviewed. He's a retired general of the FSB, and he drew a psychological portrait of the new head of the PMC. He believes this person will have to be more pragmatic, less authoritarian, but no less authoritative than Prigozhin and Utkin. And we could add to that less of a public figure, less of a businessman. And according to this former general of the FSB, Prigozhin's successor could be 61-year-old Andrei Troshev, call sign Sedoy. From what I read, he was pushed out of Wagner some time ago because of alcohol and drug abuse problems. I just doubt that a man like that could just come in and simply be respected by all the Wagnerian commanders. Meanwhile, retired Colonel Viktor Litovkin believes Wagner's Council of Commanders will decide for itself on who will lead the company next. And this is also what I think. Meanwhile, an ex-Wagnerian fighter called Konstantin spoke to journalists about the death of Prigozhin. He said this, of course, was to be expected, but there's still Lotos. He was not on the passenger list. There's Ratibor. There's Pioneer. He's right, there are many senior commanding officers of the Wagner PMC that are still alive and that could take over the organization. One of the most likely candidates could be Lotos. He regularly appeared on Telegram side by side with Prigozhin and could possibly be the number 2 in the chain of command. On top of that, on the 15th of August, he said the transfer of Wagnerian detachments into the Russian armed forces is a fantasy of the Ministry of Defense. There's also Detachment Commander Zombie, who proved himself on the battlefield multiple times. He could most likely become the commander of the military wing of the PMC, while Lotos takes over the political wing. There's even callsign Ratibor, the one who raised the flag on the last building of Bakhmut. Just like the others, he said, "We will not go anywhere. We will not leave anyone, and we will defend the Russian people to the last." Yevgeny Prigozhin was my comrade and close friend. Meanwhile, the rank and file of the Wagner PMC also have their own concerns. Many wonder if their pensions and medical treatments will still be paid for. If the Wagner PMC came to be dissolved, many would face the choice of signing with the Ministry of Defense or get a job as a security guard for 25,000 rubles a month in some random mall. Truth be told, most of them do not see themselves going back to civilian life. Many believe that if the Ministry of Defense was in fact behind Prigozhin's plane crash, then this was all done so that Wagnerians finally submit and sign onto the Russian armed forces. Meanwhile, there are also rumors that Wagner's camp in Belarus is being dismantled. Yes, the tent encampment that CNN visited is getting dismantled for security reasons. Since the 15th of August. Think about it, tents provide zero cover from any bombardments. And we've seen it, they're very visible from satellite images. Like I said in my previous video, the musicians built many camps across Belarus. Camps that are hidden deep into the forests, made of trenches and underground tunnels. Following Prigozhin's death, Lukashenko is believed to have said, "Wagner lived, Wagner lives, and Wagner lives on." In Belarus. To this effect, many people already spotted the change of Wagner's logo, which was modified to fit the emblems of Belarus. Perhaps Lukashenko was behind all this. Perhaps he had some beef with Prigozhin and Utkin, and that he wanted to increase control over his new army. At last, inside the Wagner Center in St. Petersburg, several representatives of the PMC said that they will not go away. There are commanders who can and will soon give instructions on how to proceed. So I guess all we can do is sit down and wait for the Wagner saga to unfold.